So today I wanted to talk a little bit about how to grow cucumbers. Now, cucumbers are kind of a mid-season crop. They do like the warmer weather, so it won't be the first thing you plant. And you'll have to wait until either the garden soil has warmed up enough or at least start them indoors before taking them outside before the weather gets warmer. Now, starting from the beginning, when you choose which type of cucumbers you want to plant. Find out what varieties kind of work best in your area, and then decide if you're going to go ahead and get your seeds. Hopefully, you're getting them at a reputable dealer or at a store that sells good quality seeds. But also decide if you want to also get any hybrid seeds. I would say majority of my seeds, probably more than 70% of them, are hybrid seeds. The reason I buy hybrid seeds is I like to have more female flowers than male flowers. And usually I'm getting about 80% female flowers, so that way I have more cucumbers to eat. And by having more females, which are the ones that produce the fruit, the vegetable, I'll have a lot more cucumbers to pick. Now, if you choose not to go with the hybrid way, that's perfectly fine, but you just won't get as high of a yield. Now, once I buy my cucumber seeds and decide which ones I want to grow, then I'll go ahead and I'll start mine indoors just because I'm here in the Pacific Northwest. And the ground soil is fairly cold still. I mean, we're still getting temperatures between 45 and 48 at night. And the ground soil should be somewhere around the mid 70s. And warm in order for it to germinate and do well. So I start my seeds indoors and get started that way so it has a jump start on the growing season. Now, if you're starting in the garden or in pots, you're going to go ahead and use like potting mix soil, which I have here, and then you're going to amend it with some sort of compost. The reason for that is cucumbers do like a little bit of compost soil in their mix. By mixing it with some sort of rich organic matter or some compost along with a high quality potting mix for pots and or raised bed soil, you'll go ahead and have a good start to that. Now, if I'm going to go ahead and plant it directly into my garden, I'm going to go ahead and amend it by adding a little bit of garden compost, just because cucumbers do thrive off of having a little bit of organic rich matter in their soil. I usually, for my raised bed and my garden bed, I'll go ahead and amend the soil, and then I'll wait for temperatures on most days throughout a week to be above 70, 75-ish. Cucumbers are a warm-loving plant, and if you start them too early, they'll kind of suffer through that growing pains. And so I like to start my seedlings indoors where I can go ahead and start germinating them, and they get off to a really good start. And at night, we're still getting about 45 to 48 degree temperatures at night, which is a little cold. So I bring these indoors. As the temperature warms and the ground soil warms, then I can go ahead and leave them outside. So by the time these grow enough and it sets its third and fourth sets of leaves, true leaves, I'll be able to bring them indoors. Typically with cucumber plants, because they're a warm-loving plant, we're shooting for the mid-70s before we go ahead and start planting them into the garden area. Now, the spacing of cucumbers depends on if you're having a vine-type cucumber or if you're having a bush-type cucumber. Now, typically, I'll go ahead and space my cucumbers about 36 to 60 inches apart. But if they're going to be on a trellis, then I can go ahead and space them only 12 inches apart. Now, I'm growing mine, of course, as you know, in the hydroponic systems, and most of mine are going to be in some sort of vine growing way. So I'll go ahead and just have a pole and trellis situation I'll be using. Now, keep in mind that such as cucumbers, who are warm-loving plants, they also like to have a pH soil composition that's slightly acidic. So if you were to go ahead and incorporate a little bit of peat moss into your mix, in your soil mix, that would be helpful. They're not overly acidic loving, but they are slightly acidic loving. And I've noticed that specifically this Miracle-Gro potting mix is slightly acidic. They're usually around 7 or a little bit less than 7, so that's perfectly fine. But I always like to amend my soil to give it extra nutrients and also give it more aeration and drainage. So I do always add a little bit of peat moss into my soil composition if I'm going to go ahead and grow cucumbers in like pots or containers. Now, outside of the pH level, like I told you before, make sure you go ahead and amend your soil slightly with compost, possibly a little bit of peat moss, and then make sure that you're using good quality soil, and you're also going ahead and you will fertilize that soil as the growing season goes on. Now, what I typically do is after my third and fourth sets of true leaves form, you're going to go ahead and possibly start seeing flowers forming. Once the flowers start forming, I wait until the flowers have actually set and I see tiny little cucumbers. So that way the flowers don't drop off with me fertilizing my cucumbers, because they are heavy feeders. Now what I use is this water soluble. With cucumbers, it really does benefit from using a water-soluble fertilizer. But once the flowers set and I see tiny little cucumbers and it needs the extra additional nutrients and energy, I start off by only using half strength of the water-soluble fertilizer. I want to make sure that the fruit doesn't shrivel up and die or drop off. And so I start off giving it every couple of weeks, every 10 to 14 days, I'll go ahead and hit it with a water-soluble fertilizer. And I only do half strength at first just to see how it's working, because as you know, a tiny little cucumber the size of your fingernail isn't going to need as much nutrients as a cucumber that's 3 to 6 inches tall or long. And so I start off with about a half strength first to see how it takes first, and then I'll go ahead and increase that to the full amount on a regular basis once I have plentiful cucumbers growing on a vine. Now keep in mind that as the soil warms and you have it in your raised bed or your garden bed, or in pots, as the soil warms, I like to, especially in my garden bed and raised bed, I'll go ahead and layer it with some sort of mulch or straw mulch just to help keep slugs and beetles and other bugs and insects away and keep that soil somewhat moist. Keep in mind that cucumbers love and suck up a lot of water, especially in the height of the summer season. They will suck up so much water that you may need to water it 2-3 times in one day. And so on really hot days when it gets to be 85 degrees and warmer, I've had to water my cucumbers more than twice a day. Just to keep it hydrated. It will suck up the water and dry it out, which is not really good for the cucumbers to be fluctuating from dry soil to moist soil. And so I try to make sure that I don't forget about it. If I'm gone, if you have to be gone all day for work, give it a good soaking in the morning before you leave for work. That way it's not going to dry out by the time you get back. Outside of that watering situation, I like to make sure that I'm protecting my cucumbers early on. As you can see, these are just been planted and the first set of true leaves are coming in. This one here is a little bit further along and they're a little bit bigger. But in my particular area, some of the problems that I face with trying to grow cucumbers is I got a lot of Japanese beetles, other beetles, and I got rabbits. And they love to eat the tender young leaves of a cucumber plant early on. And unfortunately, if they get at them early, the plant usually never recovers. So I really like to make sure that I keep the plant above ground if it's in a pot, and so keep it away from rabbits. And then I actually put these containers as they're growing. They started the seedlings indoors, but then I take them outside during the daytime and I keep them on top of an old car just to make sure that it's harder for beetles to get to them. The rabbits can't get to them. And other flying insects like grasshoppers, they tend to have a harder time if something is more elevated. So in the past, I used to just leave them on the grass or the lawn or the deck, but I noticed that they can get at them. So I just put them on top of an old car just to keep them protected. Now, there's also another thing you can do. Something that you've seen me use before is you can use like a paint strainer bag or a jewelry bag, wedding jewelry bag, and cover the tops of them if they're going to be at ground level. And then if you also have a garden sheath, garden cover to protect it from the insects, that would be helpful. It's really important early on as it's setting its first and second set of true leaves that you allow it to keep on growing and not kind of combating the elements with all the insects and bugs flying around. Because once they get to the initial first stem and the first true leaf, you're going to have some problems. And it's very rarely do they come back. And so that's why I make it such a strong effort when I'm growing my cucumbers initially to protect them from the grasshoppers, the Japanese beetles, other beetles, and then of course at nighttime the slugs. And then because I have a rabbit problem here in my neighborhood, I just can't keep them on the lawn or on the patio because they would get at them whether it's daytime or nighttime. Now, outside of pollination issue, like I discussed with the fertilizer, if you over fertilize, sometimes it'll drop the flowers. And so I like to wait until the flowers are set. I have tiny little cucumbers before I hit it with my first set of water-soluble vegetable fertilizer. Once that's set, then I'll go ahead and do a regular feeding of my cucumbers because they are heavy feeders and they also like a lot of water. Now, make sure that as you start picking your cucumbers in the growing season, that you make sure that you don't go ahead and let them get overripe or over large, because once you start seeing yellow bottoms on your cucumbers, it means that it's basically oversized and they've grown too long on the vine. They will end up getting a little bit bitter and it'll be kind of waterlogged and it just won't taste very good. And so once you see that, you know that you've let them grow too long. I tend to pick mine a little bit premature, a little bit earlier. I wanted to keep on producing more flowers throughout the growing season. So I try to make sure that I don't let any grow too large and too long. Also, the cucumbers will continue to produce flowers and continue to provide a good harvest as long as you stay on top of that. I don't want a lot of energy going to cucumbers that are over mature because first of all, they just don't taste very good. They end up becoming bitter and waterlogged. And then also, it's very easy with cucumbers where you kind of miss one or two in your garden. So I really do a thorough look to make sure that I'm picking them and I haven't let some accidentally stay on the vine too long. Now to recap a little bit about the growing of the cucumbers. Figure out what kind of cucumbers you want to grow. Find out if you want to just get normal seeds or hybrid seeds that will generate more flower to male flower ratio. You're going to have to slightly make your soil more acidic and more in tune with what cucumbers like, which is going to be a little bit of compost mix. And I like to throw in a tiny bit of peat moss to give it a little bit more acidity. Make sure that your soil is well draining if it's in pots and containers. And then make sure that you don't start them until you get warm weather. The ground soil should be, your ground soil, your raised bed soil, outdoor temperature should be somewhere in the mid-70s. If it's under that, but you want to get a head start on your plants, go ahead and start the seedlings indoors. With cucumber beetles kind of prevalent in my neighborhood, I do hit my cucumbers on a regular basis with neem oil spray. So every time I'm spraying my tomato plants, and occasionally every other time that I spray my tomato plants, I'll spray my pepper plants, and that's about the same time I spray my cucumber plants. I also look at the undersides and the hidden areas in my cucumber beds because it's amazing how many beetles will be hovering in that area and underneath the leaves. So I make sure to go ahead and check for beetle infestation problems on a regular basis with cucumbers because they can devastate a cucumber bed. So that's a little bit about how to grow cucumbers. If you have additional questions, just shoot me a message.